the change that you want or no change at all, which is so self-centered and arrogant. It's hard to hear. We all saw the thing on Twitter, or heard about the thing on Twitter where RFK was on Rogan's podcast. He said a bunch of things about autism and Wi-Fi and all this stuff. And I think people are actually way more keen to listening to that kind of conversation now than they were 4 or 5 years ago. And asking bigger questions and asking different questions and just being curious and wanting to find out why things are changing the way they're changing, why people are sicker, why autism rates are so high, and why that's changed so much in the past 50 years. And Peter Hotez came out, tried to call bullshit. Rogan invited him on the podcast, said he donated $100,000 to the charity of his choice. And then people started adding to that. It ended up well over $1 million donated to whatever charity he wanted to come on or wanted to donate to come on Rogan's podcast and debate RFK with no time limit. And I'm sure Rogan would have been open to having another moderator there, maybe someone like Mehdi Hassan, who is a complete shill of corporate media and the pharmaceutical industry, right? So that guy also called bullshit, and it's been a crazy thing. But of course, Peter Hotez is not going to go on there. He can't really hold up to scrutiny, and he has his lackeys kind of backing him on that, and it's been a shitstorm, right? Pretty predictable. Hotez was never going to go on there and debate RFK. Hotez is a coward. He's a junk food addict. He gives zero about actual health. His focus and desire and the complete goal of his job, right, his career, is pharmaceutical intervention. So to think that he's not going to be pro-pharmaceutical intervention and is going to back off of that an inch is pretty naive. It's just not going to happen. And there's probably not even that much we could learn from that besides embarrassing him, which would be fun, but it's not going to happen. I have less of a problem with that than I do with this. Now we're going to play this full segment. And I did this a while back with Krystal Ball and her kind of bad faith conversation with RFK on Breaking Points. And when I look at that, I was like, all right, cool. And they had him on again, which I appreciate. And I appreciate them having him on. I appreciate them discussing him and doing whatever. Krystal seems to fashion herself as an anti-war, anti-institutionalized intelligence leverage. Like she seems to pretend that she wants to undermine the intelligence community, the military industrial complex. She wants to do something about healthcare. All of these things. She seems to believe these things, right? But when someone has the track record, the capacity, the experience to do those things, she finds a reason to undermine this person. So we're going to play this. It's called Billionaire-Backed Populism Exposed from Breaking Points. So let's just play this as a 10-minute clip of Krystal in her monologue here on Breaking Points.
Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, devoid of much tangible political progress and stripped of hope that anything could really change, our politics has mostly collapsed into a competition of vibes. Crafty politicians, recognizing the angry populist moment, they've seized on the anti-establishment aesthetic, offering appealing contrarian vibes that substitute for an actual platform that really challenges economic elites, where if you can mutter a few magic mantras and get the right people to hate you, then you too can have your moment in the political sun. These fraudulents are seizing on a market opening. A large group of voters are disgusted, rightly so, with the two major parties and angry with an economy that has failed them for their whole lives.
I want to just up in here real quick. I wasn't planning on this, but when she says get the right people to hate you, what she's talking about is the pharmaceutical industry, the military industrial complex, and the intelligence community, right? So when we think like, oh, if these people hate someone, that must mean they're kind of onto something. That's what she's talking about. Those are the same people that she seems to hate, right? Those are the same people that she seems to want to undermine. But it's a problem when those people dislike a candidate because that candidate seeks to undermine them. It's a weird little bit of hypocrisy there.
But actually delivering for those voters and standing up to the economic royalists, that is so hard. Embracing catchphrases is so easy. So after having absorbed the political lessons of Trump and burning the itch that both of them scratched, this election season has seen an explosion of candidates who know how to talk the populist talk without actually really walking the walk. I got 3 examples for you today of politicians left, right, and center that this description fits. First, let's start with the least successful and most clownish fraudulent effort. This comes courtesy of the folks at No Labels. Now, this is a billionaire-backed group that is planning a third-party run and seeking ballot access in all 50 states. Their website uses all the language of anti-establishment third-party efforts. They talk about the duopoly. They speak in vague terms about the common sense majority. As we found out, though, in an interview earlier this week, they're very skittish when you actually ask them about their specific policy views. Just take a listen. Can you get specific about what your complaints specifically with Joe Biden are and how your theoretical candidate would reflect a different policy valence than what the Biden administration, which I view as very centrist and very moderate, which is you guys' brand, what they've put forward?
So this is something that we've been very clear about since the beginning, which is we are not doing this because of subjective judgment about how good or bad Biden is or a judgment about Trump. What we're doing is something that nobody else in the political system seems to be doing, which is actually just responding to what the public clearly wants. Now, they have obviously different reasons for not liking Trump right now or not liking Biden. But the one thing we can anchor in is that they want a better choice. And in our view, having the ballot, and in July, we're actually going to be putting out some ideas. What that's going to finally do for the first time in a long time is there's this huge common sense majority in this country that gets ignored, that both parties don't feel like they have to be accountable to.
It's no accident that No Labels actively avoids specific critiques of Biden or of Trump, preferring to live in the mushy language of common sense and unity. Because the billionaire-backed agenda that they actually support is wildly unpopular. We know
We'll agree that No Labels is kind of a joke.
that because we can see from their allies and from their track record where their commitments truly lie. No Labels favorite, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, she went to the mat to protect the private equity bonanza carried interest loophole. Another No Labels darling, Joe Manchin, he blocked tax hikes on the rich. Josh Gottheimer of the No Labels Allied Problem Solvers Caucus, he was ready to blow everything up to reinstate the SALT tax deduction for the rich. Their allies have been among the most slavishly devoted to protecting corporate interests and low taxes for the wealthy. Now, tellingly, No Labels complains about Republicans and Democrats being beholden to special interests, but then they refuse to disclose their own donors. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of confused about their 2024 tactics, but their goals are really clear. They want to use majoritarian rhetoric to Trojan horse in an agenda that is even more pro-corporate than what Biden or Trump would actually enact. The polar opposite of what the American people truly want. Next up, we've got the right-wing mode of fraudulism, which has been embraced by quite a few prominent figures, but is articulated in its most pristine form by Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, Vivek and DeSantis, among others, they've used the cloak of wokeness to posture as anti-corporate, while boosting what is truly a thoroughly corporate-friendly ideology. Just take a listen.
So in a nutshell, here's how it worked. Wall Street got in bed with a bunch of woke millennials. Together, they birthed woke capitalism. And of course, they put Occupy Wall Street up for adoption. You don't even know what that is anymore. That's the Wall Street edition. As it turns out, there's a really similar backroom deal playing out in the other coast, in Silicon Valley as well. And here's the way it works over there. Woke activists demand that big tech censors political views that they don't like. And in return, the left agrees to leave big tech's monopoly power intact. And again, it is working masterfully for both sides. That is how this new arranged marriage works. This is not a marriage of love. This is more like mutual prostitution, and it is working. And the net result is the rise of America's newest Leviathan, the woke industrial complex. It is no longer just Wall Street. It is no longer just Silicon Valley. It is the entirety of corporate America as we know it.
This is actually a pretty clever trick, which I talked about at greater length in an earlier monologue, breaking down Vivek's interview with Jordan Peterson. Basically, embrace anti-corporate language, but instead of looking to address their power grip on the nation through antitrust, getting money out of politics, boosting unions, and the like, you hit them on nothing more than their fake diversity and environmental virtue signaling. You can see this playing out right now with outrage over Target's meaningless pride displays or Bud Light's use of a trans influencer. Do you think these companies actually care one bit about LGBTQ allyship? Of course they don't. They just thought marketing to the queer community was a good money-making strategy. You're not putting even a tiny dent in their social and political power by fixating on their meaningless gestures. But it is a brilliant way to keep your big donors and still maintain your populist aesthetic. Now, Vivek has actually made a whole career out of opposing so-called ESG. He even launched his own fund to pressure companies into strictly pursuing short-term profit maximization without the fake liberal values. But if it needs to be spelled out, forcing companies to only maximize profit is not exactly the revolutionary stance they might want us to think it is. Vivek and his ilk posture like they're opposing capital, when in reality, they're just demanding capital be as psychopathically committed to the bottom line as possible. Now, if your biggest beef with corporate America is a Pride Month display, your biggest problem with Wall Street is some diversity hires, and your biggest complaint about the military-industrial complex is some inclusion training, you have completely missed the point, and your phony critique challenges absolutely nothing.
Well, I think that Vivek doesn't have a chance. I do think he kind of occupies that space that Andrew Yang occupied in the Democratic primary last go around, where he does change the conversation and he has valid points. But I do think that his substance is quite shallow. But that being said, he can identify the trend that happened and how things like Occupy Wall Street have gone by the wayside because Lockheed Martin and whoever financial institution flies a rainbow flag. Like that is a little bit absurd, and I think is done a lot to avoid accountability for those institutions. Now let's continue to the most egregious part of this monologue.
And that brings me to the weird world of the online left mode of faux populism as represented by RFK Jr. Now listen, on a personal level, I actually really like Bobby. And for what it's worth, he strikes me as truly sincere. But it's become increasingly clear we share very little in terms of a commitment to checking corporate power and restoring power to the working class. His approach, though, has been the most successful by far in finding appeal, I think because of his sincerity.
His primary message is that his responsibility is to rebuild the middle class. That without a middle class, we do not have a functioning democracy. If you have nothing but wealthy people on top and widespread poverty beneath them, you do not have a democracy. He has said that several times, Krystal. That is an essential part of his message that you seem to ignore for some reason. I can't understand why, but you seem to ignore it over and over and over again.
And because it contains a few truly anti-establishment positions, namely his stated desire to end military aid to Ukraine, to combat online censorship, and to challenge big pharma. But if you ask him any questions on economics, he will proudly tell you he is a, quote, radical free marketeer, and that is music to the ears of every Wall Street ghoul and corporate profiteer. He's not sure what the minimum wage should be, won't fight for Medicare for all.
The minimum wage thing. They brought it up on the show. They said, what do you believe the minimum wage should be? I think, personally, as someone who is really in favor of certain areas having a much higher minimum wage, that a standard minimum wage for the entire country is absolutely absurd. It is so much more expensive to live in Denver than it is to live in Castle Rock, right? It's so much more expensive to live in Austin than it is to live in San Marcos. These are different areas that deserve a different minimum wage. It's different to live in Dallas than it is to live in Graham, Texas. And for them both to have the same minimum wage is absolutely moronic. It should be so much higher in a place like Dallas, and it could be much lower in a place like Graham, Texas, where I grew up. You can survive there on $30,000 a year. Now, that's changed a lot because many people from the Metroplex have moved to that area and bought up little novelty ranches and things like that. But what Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s position was is that people deserve a living wage and we need to rebuild the working class. And he's open-minded in how to do that, unlike Bernie Sanders, who I was a supporter of, who thinks you can blanket government policy your way out of these things, which is so fucking naive. Let's be real. Bernie Sanders fucking lost. He lost, okay? He lost because he was toothless, and he lost because he didn't embrace nuance, and he was so singularly focused. And then he took on some other shit in 2020, and he lost again. And that frustrates me to no end. And yes, there was a ton of corruption that played part in that, but a lot of that had to do with his own failings. And so to be open-minded in how you want to achieve a living wage and to be open-minded to different things and see how the future is going to be shaked out with AI and different ways of minimizing the workforce, there needs to be a lot of open-mindedness and curiosity around this, which Krystal seems to have zero capacity to internalize.
Doesn't know what he thinks about UBI and a federal jobs guarantee, and he will signal verbal support for unions, but hasn't laid out an actual plan to reverse decades of union density decline. No wonder his bid has received backing from a number of prominent billionaires. When Brianna Joy Gray recently asked about his support from those billionaires and whether he would accept corporate PAC money, RFK Jr. ended up sounding exactly like Nancy Pelosi, declaring that he's got to raise as much as possible, no matter the potential corruption.
I'm going to tell you this. I'm not allowed to coordinate with our super PACs. But I think, and Bernie was able to do, as you said, to raise a lot of money. And I think Obama was raised a lot of money. And that's what I'm going to focus on from small donors. But, if you're a super PAC, the law is just wrong in our country, but it's hard to, at some point, you have to say, okay, I'm going to play by the rules as they are given to us. I'm not going to bring a knife to a gunfight.
By deciding he wants to win, by deciding he wants to play by the rules are there, even though he admits the rules are wrong, and by committing to repealing Citizens United, where money does not equal speech, which was a terrible ruling by the Supreme Court, by admitting that, but then being committed to actually winning to make the changes that need to be made so that's not the case going forward, you're going to undermine him? That's how you want to function with this shit, Krystal, because it's not the lady who married you, right? Because it's not Marianne Williamson, and her pie in the sky bullshit isn't resonating because it's not 2016, and people don't want Medicare for all because they don't really want their healthcare coverage to be dictated by taking the drugs the government wants them to take. It's lost support. I'm sorry. It's not a fucking popular message anymore. It's done. It's over. The time has passed. And if we want to actually fucking win and make these changes, you've got to make some concessions and you've got to play the game. Bernie didn't play the game, and Bernie fucking lost. I'm more interested in winning than I am losing and feeling good about it. I'm fucking tired of that shit. I've done it enough times. I've done it for a decade. It's fucking over with. And your closed-mindedness is not doing anybody any favors.
Even on RFK Jr.'s supposedly core anti-establishment positions, Bobby's opposition to the Ukraine war is not matched by a similar critique of U.S. empire. He's made some pretty eyebrow-raising comments about China and notably upholds the pro-Israel line of every American president from both parties. And if he thinks that cutting the defense budget in any meaningful way will be any easier than, say, passing Medicare for all, he's really got another thing coming.
So what RFK said on Glenn Greenwald's show, System Update, is that he had come out and said some things about Israel and Israel funding, and then Greenwald challenged him. And you know what he said that most politicians don't do? He said, I need to rethink that. I think it may be time that we let Israel stand on its own 2 feet. He changed his position in real time and was open-minded and curious enough to hear that from Glenn, because Glenn made very valid points. And I am not in favor of giving Israel any more money because they have a higher standard of living than we do in the United States for Israeli citizens. They have universal health care. That place is nice as shit. Now, what they're doing to the Palestinians is we need to figure that shit out. We need to focus on that, and they need to be responsible for what they're doing there. On both sides of that, it's a chaos. And I am against funding Israel's Iron Dome and all these other things, right? I don't want to be throwing money at them. But the fact that he was open-minded enough to rethink his position in real time and wasn't out here talking canned talking points is not enough for Krystal. It's not enough. Give me a break, lady.
And RFK Jr.'s life's work, which is raging against Big Pharma, correctly pointed.
His life's work, raging against Big Pharma. His entire career up until, 15 years ago, was as an environmental lawyer. He undermined Monsanto. They had to sell to the Bayer company because they were going to be bankrupt due to lawsuits that he won against Monsanto. He wants to talk about agriculture and soil health and water quality. And you're going to sit here and make it about the pharmaceutical industry. Go back to MSNBC, Krystal. You are no better at this point than the people that are talking heads on MSNBC. You rail against corporate media while cucking to the same bullshit that they do. It's become I'm embarrassed of myself for being in support of you. I am reconsidering canceling my premium membership because of this shit. I can just watch clips, and because what you're going to say is totally predictable. I can watch Chris Hayes say the same shit.
Pointing out their corruption, but incorrectly pushing fact-free claims that vaccines cause autism. Even on this core issue, he would keep the current disgusting system intact. When I asked about checking pharma through nationalizing the industry, or at least creating a public pharma option, he immediately rejected those solutions as contrary to his free market commitment. On censorship, Bobby seems to embrace the...
If you don't want to solve the problem in the way I want to solve the problem, then you. That's what Krystal just said. If you don't want to solve the problem in the way that I think the problem should be solved, then you. What he's talking about here, Krystal, because no one else is doing this. No one else wants to talk about more rigorous testing for pharmaceutical drugs, holding pharmaceutical companies accountable for their fuck-ups, removing liability shields for vaccines so the pharmaceutical industry can be sued when it harms folks. No one else is talking about that. But if you don't want to nationalize it, if you don't think it's the best idea to nationalize the pharmaceutical industry, then that's not enough. We'll just do this. We'll just elect somebody who does the same shit that we've been doing for the past 50 years, since the Reagan administration. So what you're in favor of, Krystal, is the change that you want or no change at all, which is so self-centered and arrogant, it's fucking hard to hear.
Right-wing concept of fighting censorship by finding the correct billionaires to control platforms, and that strategy has utterly failed under Elon, rather than advocating for a more fundamental solution that would devolve content moderation to the people. So to sum up, based on what we've heard so far, under RFK Jr., billionaires keep their social media playthings, big pharma continues to pillage, and at least some of the most damaging and hypocritical aspects of the American war machine march on. Like Trump, however, the right people hate RFK, and so that's enough for many.
The billionaires she's talking about supporting him there's two. Chamath Palihapitiya and David Sachs. Chamath came and made himself a billionaire. He was poor as he lived above a laundromat as a kid. I don't know David Sachs' history, but these guys both, if you listen to them talking, there's hours and hours of Chamath and David Sachs talking on the All In podcast and sharing their views. And their views oftentimes are majoritarian positions. And they've seen the overreach of centralized authority in this country, and they've spoken to that at length. And they've disagreed with their co-hosts, and they've stood up for their values, and they display their principles. And as far as billionaires go, you're going to need billionaires to win. That's where Bernie fucked up. You need billionaires to win. This is the United States of America. Do I wish it was that way? No, but that's the reality. And if Sachs, who's a Republican, and Chamath, who is one of the largest Democratic donors, are on the same team with somebody, they might be onto something, Krystal. And maybe you're a little butthurt because they don't take Marrianne Williamson seriously, but that's not enough. This is in bad faith, plain and simple.
8/11 without troubling themselves too much with the details. Although, to be honest, a lot of his online support is from the libertarian and nationalist right, so RFK Jr.'s comfort with billionaires and corporate power won't necessarily be a problem for them. As for the normie Democrats who are disgusted with Biden and enthused by the Kennedy name, too early to say how they're going to respond once they actually tune in to his pitch. So there you have it. Lots of billionaire-backed anti-establishment vibes this cycle, and my advice for you, for what it's worth, is to know what you believe in. Make sure you demand specifics, don't get distracted by surface-level critiques, and as always, follow the money.
Okay, Krystal. So let's look at this. The problems that you think we don't want to solve. So what Krystal is so dedicated to is Medicare for all, right? So what she doesn't want to actually make America a less sick place. She just wants to pay for the sickness publicly, right? And we talk about autism. She says, okay, I don't know if vaccines cause autism. I don't know. I do know that I don't trust those motherfuckers at all, and my daughter is completely unvaccinated. And you can come in the comments and call me all kinds of fucking names. I don't give a shit. I do not care. Not going to change my mind. Don't trust them. Think she's better off without them. That's my choice as a parent. If you don't agree with that, you can go fuck yourself. Do whatever you want to do for your own kids, and that's fine. So we look at this here. Here's the rate of autism. Since 2000, it's now up to 1 in 36 children. In 1995, it was 1 in 1,000. And yeah, while a little bit of that can be attributed to better detection standards, that can't attribute, the whole thing can't be attributed to that. If we look back and even go back a little bit further here, 1970s, 1 in 10,000. 95, 1 in 1,000. 99, 1 in 500. 2000, 1 in 150. 2004, 1 in 125. 2006, 1 in 110. Now we fast forward to 2020, 1 in 154. Now in 2022 or 2023, it's 1 in 36. Exactly. 1 in 36. That's aggressive. That is an aggressive increase. Now, while people with autism deserve respect and care and love like any other kid, it can be a really tragic experience. Parents don't get a chance to live their lives, right? It takes away from attention from their other children. They have to quit their jobs. They don't get to go on date nights. They don't get to be intimate with their partner in the same way. It degrades relationships. A lot of marriages don't make it, and that's devastating. That's devastating to families. That's devastating to other children. And if we do, and Krystal has zero, because what Robert F. Kennedy wants to do is do more testing on these vaccines. Because you got to think, maybe you don't agree with him on the vaccine position, but how does that manifest in policy? More testing, more rigorous testing, accountability for vaccine companies who have overstepped and harmed people, right? Removing the liability shield. No more pharmaceutical advertising on media, which completely dismantles mainstream media, by the way, which Krystal apparently now all of a sudden has zero interest in. Day one, he is committed. He will sign an executive order banning pharmaceutical companies from advertising on TV. So the funding for CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, ABC, all of that is drastically changed. But apparently Krystal doesn't really give a shit about mainstream media anymore and undermining them, right? Or the war machine or the intelligence community, right? Not interested. Not interested in that anymore because he doesn't want to do Medicare for all, I guess, right? Now that's autism. Now think about other things. So maybe vaccines don't cause autism, but maybe there's a link between vaccines and chronic illness. That's possible, right? So if we look at this, here's a blog that put together a lot of interesting data. Chronic disease prevalence in America. What is chronic disease? Chronic diseases, this is from the CDC, are ongoing, generally incurable illnesses or conditions such as heart disease, asthma, cancer, diabetes, and these diseases are often preventable. We've seen a distinct increase from 7.5% before 1940 to 60% in 2020. So the majority of Americans have some kind of chronic illness now. That is insane. And that is absolutely destroying us when it comes to the cost of healthcare. It's destroying us. It's so challenging, right? So if we could address this and find what is going on here, maybe it's vaccines, maybe it's chemicals in the water, maybe it's the things that we allow in our food that most countries that don't have this problem don't allow in their food. There are some common links here. We've done a lot of, it could be glyphosate, right? It could be a lot of things. There are so many things that could cause this, right? Just like we found out back in the day, because we thought we knew everything, that lead in gasoline was creating brain issues. And so that's been changed, right? So we have unleaded gasoline now. People were breathing that in and it was causing developmental issues in the brain. We didn't know that at the time. We don't know everything. And to be curious and explore these things, while it would undermine these powerful institutions that seem to not want it to happen, it could be really good for public health. And how much easier would it be to get a universal healthcare system if healthcare wasn't so expensive because of preventable illness? And we can do that as a country. We have the capacity to make that happen, but Krystal is not interested in solving that problem whatsoever, unless it's done in the way that she arrogantly believes it needs to be done. And if a billionaire is attached to this in any kind of way, if a billionaire also sees these problems and wants to solve them, well, that's a red line for Krystal. It's insane. Now it says that now the CDC claims that the reason for this increase in chronic disease is poor nutrition, lack of exercise, smoking, and alcohol consumption. But if we look down here, tobacco use has dropped to 14% in the same time period. Cancer has stayed the same. Odd. Physical activity has gone up in that same time period. Alcohol intake has stayed level. And poor nutrition has stayed about level. So while everything else has stayed pretty much the same, chronic illness has gone through the roof. So that really undermines the situation. Obesity in America is tracked almost exactly with chronic illness as well, and they do consider obesity a chronic illness. So it just seems to not add up, and I want to know more. I want dedicated investigation and dedicated studies into figuring out what the fuck is going on because I care about the health of our country. But Krystal doesn't want to solve those problems. What Krystal wants to do is pay for those problems publicly. And I have zero interest in doing that. I used to be on board for Medicare for all. I think a public option is a good idea. I would like to see that. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also agrees that a public option would be a great idea. Krystal failed to mention that in her bad faith interpretation of his platform. But that's where we're at. Even alternative media. And honestly, Sauger, push back a little bit. Jesus Christ, dude. Push back a little bit. Like an inch at least. Just sit there and let that happen? Like, this wasn't that hard. This took me 20 minutes to pull this up. But Krystal has no interest in figuring out what's behind this rise of autism, and it will continue to go up. What's behind this rise in chronic illness? But you know who's making money from all this? The pharmaceutical industry and big food. And we'll continue to poison our soil, focus on monocrop agriculture. Big food will continue to be a monopoly. The packing plants will continue to be a monopoly and abuse the hardworking farmers and ranchers of our country. We will not have localized agriculture, right? Which if you seem to care about climate so much, that's the best way to go about it, is to localize our agriculture and bring the power back to local farmers and ranchers, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? Localizing food would be an incredible benefit for our country. But to have that kind of conversation, if we're not talking about Medicare for all, isn't enough for Krystal, because Krystal doesn't want to solve problems. She just wants to pay for them by taxing people more. And that's why she's a joke. Her views have not evolved one single inch in the past 10 years, and it's embarrassing to watch. And I know I'm a little bit more heated than usual. I try to keep it kind of light on this show, but to watch the only person with a track record of confronting powerful institutions and winning, the only person with that track record in the race on either side, is RFK. And Krystal is doing everything she can to make sure we get Biden again. She's a coward, and she is acting in bad faith, and it is such a joke. Such a joke. God, I can't stand it. I mean, I'm of course I'm all in. I'm on board. I care a lot. But it's not that I care so much about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I care about this country. And I care about the health of this country. And I want people to understand what is going on. And I want them to see how they're being manipulated and see how they're being used and see how their poor health is being leveraged by corporations that want to price gouge them and suck every bit of wealth and opportunity they have in their lives to line their fucking pockets. It disgusts me. It is the most disgusting part of our country. And you have Republicans that call it capitalism, which is bullshit, and Democrats who call it fat shaming or whatever the current thing is, in order to avoid doing anything pragmatic and beneficial. It's disgusting. And it's the reason why we're a joke of a country. And you think, well, Donald Trump's going to get in there because he pisses off the right. If you're going to compare the two, Donald Trump is an incompetent clown. And the people that are still in the Trump bandwagon, you need to understand he let you down. You should be disappointed in him. Well, yeah, was he unfairly attacked a bunch? Yeah. Did he handle it like somebody who has the capacity and the competence to handle it? No, because he doesn't. He's a real estate guy and a reality TV star. He doesn't have a track record of handling and dismantling and undermining powerful institutions and corporations. One person does. And if you don't want transparency and accountability for pharmaceutical industries, the same people that are telling you what to put in your children, we're not even close to the same page at all.